Well, my school teacher self says it's 7 o'clock and the bell just rang, so we will begin. Gosh, what a crowd. Thank you for coming out tonight. It's not like spring didn't hit all of a sudden and then it's 75 degrees outside and it's storming and you decided to come for an organ concert. And now for something completely different. So if you're expecting organ works by Bach and several other people, you're going to leave a little bit disappointed tonight because we're not doing any of that. Tonight we're going to have fun. We're going to do fun things. I've searched high and low for many, many years for pieces from movies, TV shows, some operas, and tonight you're going to hear a part of that collection that I've accumulated through the years. So I don't know if you've seen all the propaganda on the internet, but this is the 60th anniversary of The Sound of Music. That's hard to believe. I was 7 years old when that came out. Didn't get to see it till I was 9 years old. And I still remember vividly, and let's kind of admit it, the story is kind of stupid, isn't it? But that's the fun of musicals, and that one has stood the test of time such that it will be on again in about 3 weeks. Don't they show it on Thanksgiving weekend, and it's supposed to be the kickoff to Christmas? Now, how they arrived at that, I have no idea, but it's coming up. All of those melodies are in people's heads. Did you know that the actual Maria von Trapp was actually the humorless, rigid disciplinarian, and that the stodgy old captain was actually the playful grandfather type who actually did not discipline his kids, left it to Maria to discipline the kids, and a lot of other things in the story are also backwards. So what better way to have a concert celebrating a different kind of organ for St. Stephen's than to start with The Sound of Music? And I will tell you, it's not going to be the last time that we're going to come to The Sound of Music during this entire program. So a little bit about the organ. We obviously have pipes. Pipes come from the Chance organ of 1978, which replaced a Hook and Hastings organ of 1905. The reason I mention Hook and Hastings is it would have been top of the line in 1905. The life insurance company paid for it. I have read somewhere it cost $5,000. That was a lot of money in 1905, 1906, 1907, in that era. A lot of money. So it was a top-of-the-line instrument. Shortly thereafter, the Hook and Hastings Company declined and eventually went out of business, and it was replaced in grandeur by the Skinner Organ Company. The digital organ that we recently purchased and installed in here has the sounds of a 1920s Aeolian Skinner organ. Several, as a matter of fact. It's not just one. It's just out of their library of sounds. And the way they do it now is they will go to historic organs. They will literally record every note of every sound, and they will digitalize it so that when you play a note on the organ, you're playing a recording of that pipe. And that's why we can't tell the difference between whether the pipes are sounding or whether it's coming out of the speakers, which here at night you really can't even hardly see. And they position the speakers right by the pipes so that you can't possibly tell which is which. I can play along up here and I'm fooled too. Can't tell the difference. So we have about 113 different sounds that I can come up with. Now, why does that bring us to a fun night? Because in the 20s, that's exactly what was happening in the churches in New York and other big cities. There, of course, were fewer cosmopolitan entertainments at the time, such as we have now. So the church was the center of a lot of the musical happenings. And the organist of the church usually had another job. In fact, they had to have another job. There were very, very few full-time people, and the churches definitely didn't pay hardly anything. So if you were in New York, you probably worked on Broadway. And if you look at the music that was played in churches in the 1910s, the 1920s to the 30s, actually into the Bach revival, which began kind of in the 1950s, it's basically show tunes. So they incorporated some of the same things that they were doing at work into the church, and the Sunday afternoon concert would frequently include opera and other mediums that were going on, probably show tunes from Broadway. The theater organ movement, when talking pictures started, or just before talking pictures started, did cause the organ building to branch into two separate things, so that you had organs for the theater and you had organs for the church. But during that brief period from about 1900 to 1925, they were virtually the same kinds of instruments. So the Skinner sample that we have here on this organ has what we call orchestral sounds, designed to simulate the sound of an orchestra. And that's what you're going to get here tonight. So we'll begin with 3 selections from The Sound of Music in medley. By the way, they don't call them medley anymore. The folks out on the national tour are calling them smash-ups. So we'll start with the first smash-up from The Sound of Music. So one of the interesting things about The Sound of Music is, as a 9-year-old, when I did finally get to see it, that actually started my study, for lack of a better word, of World War II. I kept saying, what in the world is going on? And Mom and Dad finally got tired of hearing it, so I read book after book after book, and my viewing of The Sound of Music coincided with the reading of a book called Snow Treasure, which is approximately the same story in Norway. And I began questioning why, and really haven't stopped questioning that kind of thing. So you never know what a movie or what music is what seed's going to be planted. So how could you have something like this without throwing some Disney in? So you may be wondering, what is the source of all this music? What are you playing from? So in 2025, we have church music publishers. I can probably order from 15, 20,000 different books, and I can come here and play every Sunday, no problem. That does not exist for popular music quite as much, and it definitely does not exist for what we're doing here, because most of what I'm playing here is played by an orchestra. So you have what's called an orchestration. That means if you're looking at the music, you have somewhere between 12 and 30 different lines of music. Now obviously I only have 2 hands and with organ 2 feet and 3 keyboards, so we're kind of limited here. So they do what's called a transcription. A transcription can happen one of 3 ways. One, somebody looks at the 30 lines and they decide what's most important and what could reasonably be played on a staff with a keyboard, and they go pick those notes out and they transcribe it onto, in the case of an organ, 3 staffs of music. Or someone can play the song by ear, which means they're going by what they heard, and somehow what they hear corresponds to how they play it. I can appreciate people that have that gift. I do not have that gift. I have to have my notes in front of me. And then they transcribe what they have played. And then there's the 1%, the super talented people that can hear something and they have perfect pitch and they write the notes down that they're hearing. And that's mainly what I'm using tonight. It's acquaintances, a few friends, and then some other miscellaneous stuff that I've found through the years. And we'll talk more about this in one of the other pieces that are coming up. So literally I have a reduction of what's going on. So occasionally what you remember hearing on the screen or on the TV may be a little bit different from what you're hearing here, because they just could not squeeze all the notes in to where 10 fingers can actually play them. And that will show up in some of this Disney stuff, because there were 2 or 3 of these I was going, wow, this isn't what I remember hearing. And then I also noticed that the performance instructions are quite a bit different from what a lot of people play these songs, especially the tempo that they play them. So I've decided to be kind of authentic to the tempo, especially since this particular room is so acoustically dead. If you start playing it too fast, it's going to all run together and it really won't make a whole lot of sense. So some of these Disney songs will sound just a little bit different from what you're remembering. So it's time for confessions. Who had their real black Mickey Mouse ears when they were watching the Mickey Mouse Club every day? I'm not talking about the junk they sell in Disneyland and Disney World now. I'm talking about the real thing. I had it. Every day we had that Mickey Mouse Club going. And they sang every one of these songs before the year was out, probably before the month was out, except for the 2 that came a little bit later. So the last one before the reprise of When You Wish Upon a Star, you may not know that title. It was a big splash when the movie first came out. The movie is Pete's Dragon. And that was something different because it was one of the first live action and cartoons at the same time. That experimented with it before, but this is the one where it really worked. And that song really touched a lot of people, and it was on the radio constantly for the year that the film came out, and I thought you might enjoy hearing it again. Smash Up from Disney. news is we survived our first page malfunction, so now that's over with for tonight. Pinocchio is the first movie I remember going to see at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. I was 4 years old. Winnie the Pooh is the second movie that I remember going to see when I was 5 years old, also at the Fox Theater, and that's the first time I remember hearing the organ there played. So, fast forward to another Saturday growing up. Dad was off doing something with the car, and Mom was trying to get rid of my brother and me. And so she said, you know, that new science fiction movie is out, and it's playing up at the Lakewood, which was like 1.5 miles from where I grew up. She said, I really want to clean the house today, and y'all need to be gone, so is it okay if we go to the movie? I said, great! You know, that was a real treat. You didn't do that every time, every week, for sure. So she gave me $1. Dollar got my brother and I in, got us both a container of popcorn and a drink. Hard to believe. And we sat down and this movie started. And it had this weird music, and then all of a sudden all these monkeys and other simian types just started screaming at the top of their lungs, and this lasted for like 15 minutes. I think my brother was really scared. I was close to being scared, and we couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. And then all of a sudden they went to the moon. That was a little better because I was kind of interested in the moon stuff. And then all of a sudden they got to talking to this computer HAL person, and then all of a sudden it was over. So Mom picked us up, well, how was it? And I said, I am not sure at all. I've now seen it like 8 times. I'm still not sure what in the world is going on. When they came out with 2010, they did explain some of the stuff that was going on, so it made a little bit more sense then. But one thing that has lasted from that film is the theme song. And I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce that. I'll let you read it. Some of you will really like this, and I tried to make it as much like an orchestra as I could get it. blitzed when you were wondering if the pipes were going to get dusted out or not. But you all knew that would happen eventually. So when I was 17 years old, I'd been playing the organ for about 6 months. One of my classmates came up and said, I'm getting married in June. I want you to play the wedding. I went, oh my gosh. How in the world can I pull this off? And she had one request. And it was for a song that at that time did not exist, only in people's minds. So I was kind of obsessed with finding that for years and years and years, and it finally ended up being published in 1989. And I immediately bought a copy of it. It was like $10 at the time. I can't believe I spent $10 for it, but it was worth it. That'll be the second non-traditional piece that we talk about, and I've got a few more stories about it before we get to it. So this first one is from a very, very popular movie that came out, and it kind of starts with the wedding, and you'll notice when I play this, the piece just kind of stops because the wedding didn't finish. It just stopped. And then the main character went and had several adventures, so forth and so on. Finally resigned himself to what was supposed to happen, came back, and they cranked up the big organ in the big, huge cathedral where everybody in this country came out because it was the king's son, and everybody had to show up for the wedding. And they cranked the organ back up, and everyone ended up living happily ever after, but the processional stopped again just in the middle of it. So when you hear that in just a minute, it's supposed to sound like that. Don't think it's just getting cut off or anything. That's the way they designed it. So from Coming to America, we have the Wedding March. Still wasn't joking. They really didn't write an ending for it, did they? So the second piece, I can't tell you how many wedding couples that I've met with have wanted this piece for their processional ever since it first came out in 1965 in a big, huge budget movie in a big, huge European cathedral with a huge organ that they show for about 1.6 milliseconds. Grand fanfare introduction. Oh, it's great. And when I began taking organ lessons from my second teacher, my first question to him was, do you have this? And he goes, oh my gosh, if you find it, please let me know, because everybody wants it and I can't get it. And I've got somebody I'm playing for in a month. They want it. I'm trying to make it up as best I can, and it can't be made up. Well, about 30 years ago, the story of why it can't be made up came out. For this big budget movie, they actually shot the wedding scene first because they could only get this big, huge, famous cathedral for a millisecond, literally. And they had it rented or whatever they did, permission to use it, and they shot the wedding without music. They're just walking up, and when you hear it and it clicks with you, go watch the movie again, you can tell they really did. You can tell that they're just walking. There's no beat to anything. They're just walking up the aisle, but nobody notices it because they put the music on top of it, and that's all you hear. So the story is, and some people believe this and some people don't, and it is a little bit hard to believe since it was such a big budget film with big, huge names that were doing it. The story was that they decided they would go back later and record the music. Well, they got back this was in Europe, they got back to Los Angeles to the studio, and they were doing the very final cut. They got to that because they knew it would be last, and the music, and the director and the producer said to the music director, where's the recording of the music for this? And the guy turned white because they forgot to do it. Like I said, it's a little hard sell. You would think as meticulous as these movie people are, that would not have happened. So he immediately went to the Fox Theater in Los Angeles. So y'all thought I was joking when I put that thing in the newsletter about this. Went to the Fox Theater in Los Angeles, which is similar to the Fox Theater in Atlanta, only not as luxurious. And he turned on the organ there. He took off everything that made it a theater organ. Remember, I told you they were about one and the same during that time period. They took off all the tremulos and all the other things that you've been hearing here, and he made up the introduction on the spot, total improvisation. And it lasts about 45, 50 seconds, and then the orchestra takes over. So, of course, I'm talking about The Sound of Music. So, without further ado, here is the wedding processional from The Sound of Music that someone transcribed by ear and published in 1989. And the interesting thing is, now that it is available, I've never had anybody ask for it. And this is probably the first time it's been played in Milledgeville ever. It's been played twice in Madison and now once in Milledgeville. good job transcribing it, didn't he? So you see the next piece. You probably assumed you're about to hear the toccata in D minor again. No, you're not. If you weren't here last Sunday, you're just going to miss out till the next time it comes around. This is a piece called The Haunted Organ. So to set the stage in this movie, the detective goes into this house which is purported to be haunted. It's one of the better known character actors. He shakes a lot. He always gets himself into all kinds of difficulties. And he walks down the hall, and all of a sudden the organ starts playing. And so he goes in, and the ghost is playing with him at the organ because several times the ghost breaks into some really stereotypical garage band, early 1960s rock and roll, and then it goes back to the mysterious sound. And many of you will recognize this instantly. It's in a lot of commercials and a lot of TV shows too, as well as the movie. But what I thought you might be interested in is how this was constructed by one of the more well-known Hollywood sound people, because it's exactly the same thing that Bach did in the toccata in D minor. What happens is you're playing the sharp and the natural at the same time. So it sounds very mysterious to your ear. The reason it sounds mysterious to your ear is mathematical. When music sounds good to us, the different inputs all have the same x-intercepts on the graph of the sound wave. So the x-intercepts are simultaneously, your ear goes, ah, that's good music, that sounds good. If it's just a little bit off, you go, oh, I wouldn't want to listen to this all day. Bach did the same thing when he did this, bum, 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 and then it resolves, boom, and it sounds good. Well, this famous Hollywood music person did exactly the same thing with this entire piece. Now, the people that are playing it out on concerts now are doing it like double time, and you can't really get all of the subtle music part of it. So I'm not going to do it double time. I'm going to do it like normal time. And just imagine Don Knotts walking up to the organ, and the movie is The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. So that is way fun. It's also extremely difficult on your poor brain because you have the sharp, the flat, and the natural note going at the same time. So one of the tricks when you're playing the organ is usually they all line up, so if you see the sharp in the pedal, you can do the sharp with your hands too. You can't do that on that piece, so it's like reprogramming your brain the entire time. It is bizarre. Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Wow, they're still running that one every day on the FETV and METV and probably some other spots. And what about that introduction? It's actually a classical organ piece by Charles Gounod, who mainly wrote church music. We sing several pieces from him every year. Funeral March of the Marionette. So we're going to go from spooky to more meditative. If you look at the title of the next piece and the person who wrote it, this is from an opera. It's pretty obscure, but this particular piece is not. You will hear it in the background of a lot of TV shows and a lot of movies if you listen for it, or at least portions thereof. But at the time of the playing of this piece, the main character is going through a crisis, wanders through the village that they're living in, end up at the church, go into the church while he's laying his soul out to God. This is the meditation that the orchestra is playing. If there's ever been a piece that has a life of its own, that would be Gabriel's Oboe from the film The Mission. It was one of Robert De Niro's first movies, if not his very first movie. I have never actually made all the way through it. Some people have and liked it. I just thought it was kind of slow and I just could not make it through it. But Gabriel's Oboe is the theme song throughout. In my previous church, I could have played it 7 times every Sunday and everybody would have loved it and wanted to hear it again and again. We could not have a wedding or a funeral without it, for sure. And if I played it once a quarter, that was not enough. And I heard it all the time. When you go play it, of course, then they don't show it. Whoever says that doesn't show up the Sunday that you actually play it, but such is life as it is. And it's pretty much true here. That's the most requested piece I've had at St. Stephen's in the last 2 years and some months. So Gabriel's Oboe, and I'm using one of our different orchestral voices here. This is an Italian oboe that's tuned to the tenor rather than to the treble. So this will be a little bit different effect than you're used to. kind of left you hanging with the last piece in your program. About a month ago, somebody came up to me and said, "What music do you play that inspires you?" I went, okay. After 49 years and 9 months of doing this, that is the first time anybody has ever asked that. So I had to stop and think for a minute. Gabriel's Oboe certainly is one of them. And finally came up with the piece that I always go to, never far from my organ bench at home. I have my own organ at home, by the way. That's the only way I can live 42 miles away and come down here and play every Sunday. I have my own organ at home. So always sitting there, and somehow many times a year, sometimes many times a month, it finds the way to the music stand, finds its way to the piston tin, and most organists have that as loud as it gets, rattle the windows, always makes me feel better. And you may have noticed I left a song out at the beginning, Climb Every Mountain. for sharing this. I hope this was something different for all of you. There is a reception afterwards, and we thank the choir for providing the reception for us. We'll hang around and eat for a while. We'll have another one of these at some point, so maybe make it a little bit more traditional than this, but we want to have a lot of concerts so that you can hear. So far I've shown you maybe a fourth of what this thing can do. So still a lot to go over. Thank you again, and we'll see everyone later.
Thank you.